So up next, let's delve into global K12 outcomes with McKinsey partner Charag Krishnan, who will guide us through a discussion on enhancing K12 education globally, sharing strategies for student success, and innovative learning solutions.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me congratulate the ASU+GSV and Emeritus teams for a fantastic event and pulling this all together. I'm Charag Krishnan. I'm a partner with McKinsey's education practice. Do all my work focused on education, spanning higher education, workforce development, and K12. It's my honor today to stand here and share some of our newly released research that we published just over the weekend, focused on how world school systems can innovate and improve learning outcomes at scale. I use the word "it's my honor," and not that I'm excited, because frankly, some of the things I'll start with are quite depressing. To just let it sink, there are 1 billion children all over the world today that are living in learning poverty. Learning poverty defined as a child who is graduated out of primary school and is not able to read a grade 2 level text. 75% of the children in India, approximately, are living in learning poverty. Add to that, the past 3 years, our research has indicated that there's been approximately 8 months of average learning loss and delay due to the impacts of COVID from school closures. Further to that, we are living in a world where increasingly school systems have pressures on them from all sides in ways and forms that we probably did not experience when we were in school. There are issues of mental health, there are issues and questions about technology use and abuse, there are questions about what will be the impact of AI on the workplace and what are the skills of the future that our students need to be prepared for. And there are questions, big questions that are pertinent to the future of our kids in school today around climate change, political instability, polarization, and how do you process information available all over. Given all of that, we said it's really important to figure out the issues of quality and equity in education systems worldwide. And over a year and a half ago, we embarked on this new research to try and assess what has happened longitudinally in a way that hasn't been done of late. In 2007, 2010, we'd put out some marquee reports on what school systems do well in terms of going from poor to fair and good to great. And we said now, let's look longitudinally between the years of 2004 to 2019 to the extent data is available, and where not, at least through 2015, to understand where can we see bright spots of sustained improvement, see significant improvement to the tune of at least 10 PISA points, and see consistency in terms of that reported outcome improvement from expert interviews, from various reports. And I promise you it's not all depressing. There are good things and there is hope, and that's what I want to share with you today. First and foremost, a little over 15 years ago, I was a primary school teacher myself, and the focus was all on enrollment. Yes, we talked about quality, how do we improve things in the classroom, but there was a lot of focus on enrollment. How do you get kids into school? The good news, globally, enrollment seems to have grown over the past decade and a half, 2 decades of data that we have, both in primary school and in secondary school. The not so good news is when you compare the average literacy and numeracy skills using a World Bank HELO score, you see quite a bit of stagnation. Across income levels and funding levels of various countries, you see that the improvements have not been quite as much and quite as commensurate with the amount of investments that countries have been making. What's more interesting and stark is that and this is quite the sight for your eyesight, this is a eye check, to be honest. What this chart is actually trying to do is on the x-axis you have a scale of amount of money being spent per student adjusted for purchasing power parity. And on the y-axis, you see improvements, the HELO score or the performance of the system. And what's interesting to see is agnostic, even when adjusted for amount of money spent per student, the performance level varies quite a bit. So yes, funding and money is quite important, but above $6,000 of spending per student, the marginal utility seems to drop. And even at the same funding level, the performance varies quite a bit among countries. The other stark finding from our work was that we analyzed about 73 countries that take the global standardized tests. And we see that in the time frame of 2004 to 2015, 23 of them were able to show sustained growth and momentum and improvements in student outcomes, but the majority of them, 48, where we had reported data, either stagnated or declined. Even more fascinating is that you see that the performance level, and whether it stagnated, declined, or whether it continued to improve, is agnostic of what the starting point of the school system was. You have 8 schools that were in good or great performance that continued to improve, but about 31 that, despite being in good or great performance in previous data, showed declines or stagnation. Looking at this data, we then said, what are some of the things we can look at in aggregate and learn so that we can replicate what some of these 23 systems that have shown sustained improvements are doing, and that's something that others can learn from. And 2 sets of things emerged. First, the what. What does it take to improve outcomes for students in primary school? And the education community largely seems to have alignment on it, right? There is quite a bit of consensus. Yes, there might be a little bit of debate on 2 sides of the aisle of what specifically the method is that works, but there is core alignment that you start with the students, focus on talent and the teaching capacity in the school, provide the supports for the students, and move outwards from there, provide supports for teachers, provide the right funding, provide the supports for the school system overall. There's also quite a bit of alignment among the education community on what this takes in terms of interventions, and this is very much in line with our previous research reports, that the starting point of a school system is extremely important determining what interventions to deploy, and the answer to just try and be Singapore is not necessarily going to work for everyone. There, we see quite a bit of consensus. We also then looked at what is happening to the 48 systems that continue to show declines among the good to great, as well as all the others that show stagnation and decline. And some of the things that begin to emerge as common issues and challenges will sound extremely familiar. The struggle has been execution and implementation at scale. And the things that come up are actually going to be quite familiar to all of you in our day-to-day walks of life as well. Conflicting directions, lack of clarity on what is the 1 or 2 things that we should prioritize, leadership discontinuity often tied to political movement, stakeholders not being properly consulted, involved in the process, and feeling left out, and therefore, sort of experiencing a little bit of an organ rejection to reform and reform interventions. Strategy often being developed in the form of a great plan and then sitting on a shelf. Limited capacity to actually execute in the form of reliance on a lot of external third parties, but not building internal system capabilities. Flying blind in the spirit of taking a lot of interventions and focusing on the buzz of the day, but then not really following through to measure and see whether it's actually working and whether there need to be tweaks and pivots to improve. And then finally, standing still. When there's uncertainty or volatility, the easiest answer is, let me just wait and watch, as is the case, and you probably heard in one of the previous sessions around AI. When in doubt and when resource constrained, the answer is often, let me just wait and watch what will happen and then decide to do what to do. We know, and I know personally from my experience as a teacher, that it is extremely challenging already to change a practice that I've been following in one classroom. To try and do this in thousands of schools, thousands of school systems all over the world, in a way that reach those 1 billion children in learning poverty is extremely challenging. And so now we went and focused on these 23 systems that had shown improvements and said, what is it that they did? Can we find something that is a commonality, something that we see as a pattern that others can learn from? And we find 4 things. As I shared earlier, they all do align and agree on the what and focus on similar things: teaching at the right level, structured pedagogy, instructional material, training and support for teachers. They do the same thing, so there's alignment there. But they also do a set of things that are fairly common and consistent on the how to implement change at scale. They build a good coalition for change. They focus on building delivery capacity at scale, not one district, 5 districts. They try to focus on how do you reach 50,000 schools simultaneously. And they focus on data and adapting based on the data and decisions that can be made using that. And some of these take the form of actions that then result. An example being having clear and consistent priorities. Kenya, for example, between 2010 to 14, had 20 initiatives, all aligned with the best practices from the world that were implementing, but not seeing much results. In 2014, they adopted Tusomi, which is a very focused approach on improving literacy and numeracy. And within the next couple of years, they saw significant results. In the case of Peru, it was taking a 200-page document on priorities for the education system, and switching it to a 2-page document that said, these are the priorities that all of us will focus on collectively, and immediately started to see the improvements in the next 3 years. There's action around leadership discontinuity and creating systemic solutions to that, ranging all the way from, again in the case of Peru, realizing that there are certain capabilities around management of large-scale efforts that we do not have internally, and then therefore building an external workforce where they hired laterally and brought that capability in-house, all the way to the example of Norway, where they've actually set up a third-party entity that focuses on education data, and both the political parties rely on that same body for all of their policy-related data requests, which also ensures continuity of decision-making and policy and programming. Third, in terms of alignment, having a real intent towards speaking with teachers, speaking with parents, and getting them involved in the process. And there are several examples where institutions have done this well and done something beyond paying lip service. Around building capability to scale, going beyond the plan, having detailed roadmaps, having very clear accountability for who's responsible for delivering what, has been a great example. And then also effective partnerships. We've seen an example of Punjab in India, where they've partnered effectively with nonprofits to build capabilities and capacity around things that they did not have the ability to do themselves, like training 700 teachers on teaching at the right level and bringing that out to 10,000 teachers all over the state. And then finally on data, a couple of great examples. One with Estonia, where they've actually linked student outcomes to the public database of the nation. And outcomes are publicly available. They inform policy decisions at all levels across the country. Student data is linked to an individual student ID and is a part of decision making, right? And finally, in terms of standing still, taking what is happening around us and innovating, but with an eye towards measuring what works. And a great example of this is Malawi. They were very keen on bringing technology into the classroom, but at the same time mindful that they do not have the same electricity, connectivity aspects in place. And so the system they've rolled out is one of offline tablets that are charged using solar devices, but with very effective training for teachers in order to be able to roll it out into the classrooms. There's a lot more of this in the report, and a lot of examples that we have from across the world. But there's two things I wanted to also flag and caution. One is that from the examples I shared, as well as several examples you'll see in the report, these are examples from countries across the spectrum. So this is not just the best performing school systems in the world that spend the most on their students. It's not just Singapore and Poland. It's also a lot of school systems that's had a lower starting point in the journey, like Kenya or the state of Punjab, where they have made significant progress despite having started at a lower point in the journey. And the second, if you look at any one of these levers individually, it seems fairly logical and simplistic. That is not where the power lies, though. The power lies in having all of these together. So when we analyze the data of these systems taking these actions and focusing on the how, we notice that systems that did all 7 had a 6 times higher likelihood of having a successful transformative effect on the student outcomes in the country compared to other systems that used 1 or 2 or 4 of these levers. So those are sort of two important things to take away from this, and the utility of having this applicable to all systems across the world. And then in closing, the final things I'll say are, one, we have leveraged interviews, surveys, and experts throughout this process of research, and 600 odd people all over the world from 27 countries were involved, some of them in this room that have contributed to this report. So our thanks go out to all of you. And finally, I hope you'll walk away from this with a desire to learn more about the report. If there's anyone that you know that will find this relevant, could be useful, please do share it with them. Please do call on us. We're more than happy to spend more time discussing this. This is not so much a story about beating the odds. This is really a question of how do you change the odds? And we owe this to our future generation and to ourselves. Thank you.